Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have the privilege and honor of having Julien Emery from Superpanel. Glad to have you here, Julien.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ken. Excited about this.
So tell us about yourself and tell us about what is this Superpanel?
Yeah, quick background on me. I'm a technologist. I've built and sold multiple companies and am the founder of Superpanel. And Superpanel we autonomously manage complex customer journeys. So, legal intake is a complex customer journey. And we help law firms to scale and improve their intake by handling that autonomously, whether that's, first contact, taking inbound calls, reaching out to people that filled out forms, and moving those people successfully down customer journeys all the way through to signing retainers and collecting initial evidence to help get the case started.
Yeah. Well, you're doing something that's really probably the most important thing when somebody joins Pilma or somebody hires me. In the old days, I used to do a lot of consulting, don't do much anymore. But that would be one of the first things I tell them they need to work on. And they would say, oh, I sign up every case I want. And I said, and then I'd hire somebody to go do some, what do you call them, ghost calls?
Yeah.
And play it back to them, and they'd get sick on their stomach because they were at best 40% of the time doing it right, and probably anywhere from 40 to 60% time doing it wrong. And they were losing a lot of money. And, we've had firms that just worked on that and doubled their case intake in a year just by doing that one thing, not spending any more money. And it's hard to believe, but I've seen it with my own eyes. So what you're doing is very, very important. A lot of leakage on intake, a lot of wasted money. It kills me to see these lawyers spend all this money on marketing and then don't pay attention to their intake. It's like throwing money on the street, and the really big firms, they're on top of it. But I think the medium and small firms still don't get it. With all this consolidation, I think, Julien, that they better start paying attention, because they're going to every case is going to count as this thing gets, this consolidation, this equity money comes in. It's going to make a big difference. They're going to have bigger fights, and every little dime counts and every little case counts. So
true.
So tell me, what does your software do? I guess it's software. So what does it do? How does it do it?
Yeah. I can get into that. Let me take a step back, because you mentioned a couple interesting points that I want to touch on. I think there's sort of two aspects of trying to improve intake. One is, to your point, you may be a smaller firm. You said big firms kind of have it under control. So there's a lot of mid-sized small firms where, they're just missing calls. They're not picking up the phone. They're dropping the ball. They're not following up. I think it was Clio that did a study that said it was around 50% of firms they did testing across a whole bunch of different law firms, across different categories of law firms. About 50% of people don't even respond to an inquiry. So like someone fills out a form or calls in, and as a consumer, you get nothing. So there's incredible low-hanging fruit right there for any practice. If that's your situation, forget software, like just be more diligent around intake, train your people. That's like the baseline to get to. And then the next thing is, even with larger firms, we work with a lot of large firms. We work with some of the top firms, by size and volume in the country, and also some, smaller mid-sized firms. And even at a large firm, it's still challenging. Like, you'd be surprised. You go in there, and from the outside looking in, if you're an outsider, if you're a small firm, you're like, oh, these guys have it totally under control. Like, what an amazing shop. And that's great. But then you dig into it and you look at the inconsistencies, and you still look at the missed calls and the lack of follow-ups. And usually people take 8 to 12 follow-ups and touch points before they're, ready to engage, because someone might be, interested at one point, and then they get busy, and, if you don't follow up with them, they go somewhere else, or if you're not getting to them quickly enough. And so a lot of times, consistency is a problem at those firms. Turnover is a problem at those firms. The operational changes that happen, and making sure people are logging data in the right way so they can record what's happening. So you'd be surprised at how much the big firms also struggle with this. It's just they're way better as a starting baseline than a lot of the small to mid-sized firms. And then what they're trying to figure out usually is, how do they become more consistent? How do they scale? How do they achieve, or how do they enable their team to handle more volume with the same level of conversion and consistency, and not have to have maybe as many people doing it? Because in intake, obviously, there's a lot of people that reach out or contact a firm that don't have a case, and so a lot of these big firms are trying to optimize their operations and take it to the next level. But so it's kind of different problems at both levels, and we tackle both. And the other thing I'll mention, just kind of reacting to what you're saying about wanted, we talk to a lot of firms that brag about having a wanted rate of, sorry, not brag about a conversion off of a wanted rate, right? So they're like, oh, we convert 93% of our wanted cases. Like, we're amazing. We're the best. And it's like, great. Good for you. That's fantastic. But how do you know if your wanted rate is actually your wanted rate? Because a lot of times there's a ton of leads they're spending all kinds of money on, and they slip through the cracks and they don't even make it to wanted. And so we see a lot of firms kind of patting themselves in the back for having such a great conversion off a wanted rate. And we're like, yeah, but your top line conversion rate's 22%, and it should be 32% if you would not let these things slip through the crack and make it to the wanted rate. And so
They don't qualify them. So does your software, because I know there's some software out there that'll actually listen to it, and that does happen. And, I've seen that. I've seen examples of that where AI can come in and listen to it and say, hey, you missed this. You need to go back and call this person because you didn't hear it right or something. Looking at the criteria that's set in AI, this human error of not calling it a wanted case, because I think the example I heard was it was workers. And so the girl thought that, well, this is a workers' comp case. We don't do workers' comp. But they were hit by a third party, so it don't matter, right? And so they just said, well, sorry, we can't help you. Well, that was 3 people in one truck, and AI was able to alert the owner, and they were able to save those 3 cases. So, does your stuff do something like that, or?
yeah, that's fantastic. There's a lot of products that do that. We don't play in that space, and the reason is our product's a little bit different. So
Okay,
what we do is we actually autonomously handle the entire customer journey as much as a firm wants us to. So working with Superpanel is like hiring a digital teammate to come into the firm, and we teach that teammate how to handle inbound calls, how to reach out to leads, how to handle intake. And we will autonomously, without any human in the loop, go from initial contact all the way through to signed retainer and evidence collection on a case. We could be collecting driver's license, photos of the accident, insurance information, whatever that might be, kind of in that initial maybe post or pre-retainer, and verifying, organizing that, putting that all in the right place. And it's a very configurable platform. So some firms use us for initial qualification, then it passes off to a person. Some firms use us to go much deeper and handle. We've worked with some teams where they started kind of small with us, and now we're handling 80 or 90% of the intake work that was previously done by a really large human team. And now the people that are doing intake are handling just like the most valuable cases. They're spending 90% of their time just closing deals because our product is doing all the rest. And so we really autonomously interact with customers and take them through an entire customer journey.
so you're like an AI agent, basically, whatever they call them, agentic or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an agentic system. So it's an agentic system. So everyone that works with us, essentially, they'll give this digital teammate a name, and this digital teammate will get access to internal systems to can log in and interact with internal case management systems, CRM systems, what have you. Access to email inboxes, gets a phone number, and it can communicate over text, phone calls, web forms, email, interact with systems internally, and it's highly configurable. So what we do is we configure it to handle specific parts of a workflow and to hand off to humans where appropriate, or humans take it and hand it back to us, and it shows up in a law firm's environment just like another person. There's a name, there's an email address, it updates systems, and you can see it was done. That's how our product works. And so every firm technically might be doing something a little bit different with our product because it's so configurable. It's like hiring a person. And so what we do is we teach the system to operate within that firm and deliver the outputs and outcomes that firm wants.
Yeah. So I know I would think the biggest pushback you're going to get on this, because I hear it in the masterminds that I do, is that most lawyers are scared of, oh, this is kind of I want a real human talking to them, because I'm afraid, I don't want it to sound like it's not a human. And what if they screw up a big case, da, da, da. Of course, my deal is, what if a regular guy screws up a big case too, a human? I don't know. How do you deal with that? I mean, what do you tell lawyers that's, because there's a lot of lawyers won't use it because of that, I can tell you.
Yeah, 100%. No, we've met them. We've met them. And it's the right concern. I don't blame them. Like this is giving up control to, a system that, maybe you don't fully understand to go and interact with customers. And what if it makes a mistake? I totally get that. What I always look at and what we talk about, so we've done well over 250,000 and we're probably pushing closer to 300,000 intakes at this point. And that's a lot of people that we've helped interact with. And then within that, there's also multiple different workflows that someone will go through. We call those sequences in our product. It's like a workflow, and one intake could involve maybe 3 or 4 sequences. And so what we look at is the benchmark of if our product is involved in an end-to-end customer journey. Let's take intake. Let's say we're qualifying inbound calls and trying to get it up to a certain point, or qualifying not just inbound, but even form fills and reaching out to people. And we look at, how do you do that today? What's the error rate today? What's your conversion rate? What's your error rate? What are you missing? Like, what is your status quo today? And if you introduce an agentic system to do part of that work, how does that compare? So we always look at the benchmark, and we always start on a very, very small scale. So like just a tiny cohort. First, we test everything internally and set it up. And there's a whole services team that we deploy to do this. And then we test at a very small scale just to make sure it's working, super small tests. And we iterate super quickly to get to the point what we call a stabilization point, where we can say, hey, your team, in absence of any kind of agentic system, any AI system, your team has a conversion rate of X and you're able to handle Y volume. And now we've hit a point where if you've introduced this agentic system, it can handle more volume with less people involved, but we're comparing to that benchmark, and the conversion rate needs to be the same or higher if conversion rate is the benchmark. There's other benchmarks to look at depending on the type of work we're doing. But I always tell people like test it. Test it, because what we found is when you iteratively deploy this and test it at a small scale and then start incrementally increasing it as you see success, what we find is that it performs as well or better than your human benchmarks. It might make little mistakes that are different than a human would make, but the outcome that it gets to is the same or better. And that iterative process is what allows firms to get there. You can't just off the shelf. I think a lot of people have been burned because they're just like using some off the shelf AI product that doesn't have that approach or that level of configuration. But if you take that iterative approach and you configure it, it can hit whatever benchmark you have. And so I always look at compared to what? Like, what if it makes a mistake? But how many mistakes is your team making today? And I can tell you, any intake team, frankly, of any size, but especially if you get into teams of like 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 people, like there's a pretty high mistake rate happening in there. And so we just look at, compared to what, and let's make sure we're getting outputs here that are as good or better than your current way of doing things.
And another thing, and I'm not pushing this because I didn't even know what your product was before you got on the show today. So, but I'm just telling you, me as a lawyer that's coaching people to grow and save money and stuff, is that 2 things. These agents, they don't take off of work, they don't eat, they don't come in late, they don't bitch, they don't moan, they don't groan. Okay. You don't have to pay FICA for them and all this matching stuff and 401ks and insurance. But here's the other thing. Tell me, are these people eliminating the after all call centers that they're using? Because it seems like to me that's pretty expensive. And if you could eliminate that, that would probably help pay for a lot of what you're charging. I don't know. I don't even know what your price is or how you do it. I'm sure it depends on the size, the volumes of your calls and stuff. I'm sure it's got a lot to do with that. I'm sure it's very negotiable. I don't know what your price is, but I would think that, do these people still use call centers at night, like these like Legal Intake, good
Ledge
or Intake Solutions of America, or all these other companies out there?
Good question. So absolutely yes, just to start off, like we have a lot of companies that have no longer have the need to have any sort of after hours service because our system's handling all of that. So that's very common. But what we always advocate for is we don't want to push every single customer and force every single customer to go down a self-serve path involving AI, right?
You
Like
want, give them,
give them
give them out.
give them the option, right? And what we found is we have these predefined kind of paths we're trying to get people to go down. We're like, hey, if it gets to this point, then we pass off to a human because it's a predefined handoff point. And in those workflows, less than 4% of people request to speak to a human prematurely, but
Well,
give people the option. Always give people the option. So you need some people always to be there as that backup option. And so usually it's like, hey, I'm here to help you. I can help you right now. You know, it could be obviously 24/7. And as the AI system's goal is to help that person get the help they need as quickly as possible and get them to the right person. And usually, you know, when you're presenting it the right way, people take that self-serve option. They give the AI a chance. And again, like we've seen in our numbers, less than 4% of people need to be escalated prematurely because they want to talk to a person or something went off the rails.
and it seems to me the voice quality is getting better and better and better. What I used to listen to a year ago, I was coming back from Key West and we stopped. I never stopped for a sit down. I just go through a drive through. And I went through this drive through and this thing was so good. And my wife, I said, this is AI. She says, no, it's not. I said, it is. I said, I'm telling you. I said, and how I could tell it was so good that
It's too good.
It was too good because most of the people that work at these places are uneducated and they don't treat you that nice. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being honest with you. It was better than a real person. And my wife, she said, "Why do you think?" I said, "Because this thing is acting smarter and better than a real person, and it got everything right. You know, it could understand me. Most people can't understand me because I got this southern drawl." So I went around and I asked the woman. I said, "Y'all got a computer doing this?" I didn't say. I said, "You got a computer?" She said, "Yes, sir." She said, "It makes my job a lot easier." So all I got to do is fill the orders. And I'm thinking, I looked at my wife. I said, "This is where we're at now." I mean, I said, people got to get used to it. I mean, it's great in one way if you own a business. I think it's sad in another way if you're a worker, uneducated, blue collar, or even white collar entry. I think, you know, when this thing AI first came out, Julian, I said, "Oh, this ain't going to replace jobs. This is just going to make people work 10 times or 100 times more efficient." No, it's going to take jobs. It's going to take jobs. I mean, I'm seeing that now. Just what you're doing. I mean, you know, but if you own a business, well, like I said at the beginning of the show, with all this consolidation, you've got to cut your labor costs because you got to spend more money on marketing to compete with the big dogs like Morgan and Morgan and these national firms. Or don't, you're going to get wasted. I mean, you know, so we did an AI for PI conference back in January, and I didn't know what the turnout would be because still lawyers were still kind of, we had like 200 law firms there. And we started at like 90, we started to advertise it 90 days before, which was pretty. And I just told them, I said, listen, I mean, you know, it's coming. You can either come to the table or be eaten. That's the way I feel about it. And some lawyers are going to disagree with me. And I think you got to do it. I don't think you got to grab everything at one time. I think you need to do it in stages. But see, if I was doing it, intake would be the first place. And then, you know, a lot of lawyers would go into the chronologies and the demands, and that's fine. But I would use these agents to set up files with insurance companies to get medical records because they can call and they can ask for the medical records, and the people ain't going to know no difference probably. And they can just sit there and keep doing it till they answer. You know, I don't know. I mean, you're a technician, you're a technology guy, but that's what I see happening with the smart law firm owners is that they've got to embrace this, and the sooner the better. I mean, this is more important than when the internet came out. I told everybody to embrace that, and a lot of people said, "Oh, it's just a fad." I mean, no, it wasn't a fad. And the younger lawyers ate up the clocks of a lot of the older lawyers in markets because they jumped on it, and the older lawyers didn't want to change. And I'm afraid this could happen again, but this time it's going to be a lot more detrimental, in my opinion, because of other things that are going on that was not going on back then, with all this equity money and hedge money and LS, what is it? MSAs. You know, I'm just thinking that, you know, things are changing so rapidly, and you got people like Sweet James and Top Dog and Morgan and Morgan, and you're going to see more and more of this. And you've got to get your stuff together. You got to really be a lot sharper on your marketing, and you've got to be a lot sharper on your expenses. You got to keep your labor down costs. If you want to make the same profit you were making 5 years ago with a percentage, you better start reducing labor, because you're going to have to spend more money on marketing, whether you want to or not. To keep
So true.
They got to keep
Yeah.
up. You
It's
know,
so true. And I do think there'll be some amount of consolidation as a result. Like you're touching on sort of three, you could think of them as tailwinds or headwinds. I think of them as tailwinds because I think a lot of firms do, but you can also see them as headwinds. But one is the increased equity capital coming in, right? Obviously, the ABA structure out of Arizona, the MSA structure we're seeing used more often. So you've got this increased capital coming in to fund predominantly case acquisition. And then you've got this, technological inflection point where you can now bring your expenses down like you never could before. And people are trying to
right?
figure that out. And like those are two things that are coming to head at, a really
Yeah,
important time, at the same time. And then I would say third, also, depending on the state you're in the practice area, there's some fee compression depending on what type of, practice you're in. And so you're being forced even more to operate with lower revenue per case, depending on practice area and region you're in. And so that makes it really challenging. And I think at least from the AI side of things, I think like you talk about the voice getting better and people talk about like, oh, when's the voice going to be good enough, or when's XYZ AI going to be good enough? Like voice is just one component in our system. It's just one piece of many
yeah,
ways of communicating. But I think what a lot of people fail to recognize is they'll look at AI capabilities and I actually, even though there's so much hype around AI, I still think in a lot of areas there's an underestimation of how much it can do because people perceive an AI or usually when we're talking about AI, it's like an LLM doing something, right? There's a large language model doing something. And they're like, oh, well, it can't do X or it makes too many mistakes on Y, whatever it is. What they're failing to recognize is that it's a systems problem. It's a configuration problem. And what we see a lot of is it's very easy for someone to stand up a demo with AI and they're like, hey, here's a product that we built and it can do X, Y, Z, and then it starts to fall off the rails. But when you're talking about an agentic system, and let's just take intake as an example, right? You're talking about a customer journey where you're moving someone from, we know nothing about them to we've now signed them on a retainer and we're collecting evidence and moving them down the funnel of our customer journey. There's so many decisions that need to be made along the way. Like if you're training a human to do that, you got to know what to ask, you got to know when to ask it, you got to know how to handle things, you got to know what to do next. When do I put data in the system? When do I not ask questions because a colleague of mine already went through this with them? And like, where do I check that to know that so I'm not annoying the customers? There's all these decision points. And so the question is like, how do you get a system to make decisions autonomously? If you're getting a machine to do this, if it's in a single conversation or multiple interactions, the decisions have to be correct. And where a lot of AI products fail is they haven't struck the right balance of deterministic or rules-based decision making and probabilistic decision making with LLMs. And so usually they're going kind of way too scripted. And if you move outside of like a happy path of a customer journey, everything goes off the rails. Or there's way too much decision making put on a large language model and inevitably hallucinates and makes things up. But if you have the right approach to deterministic versus probabilistic decision making, you have the right technology architecture, then what that means is the configurations drive that accuracy. And so in a voice conversation, it's interesting. A lot of people are like, what does the voice sound like? We've actually done some testing to understand the performance on conversion rate by having different voices. And people are like, oh, I don't want it to sound robotic. What's interesting is customers don't care. If it sounds robotic, like they kind of don't care they're talking to a machine as long as it's a good experience and it's accurate and that machine is handling things appropriately. Same thing with a human. If you're talking to a human and they're asking you the wrong questions, or they're not hearing you,
yeah.
or it's the same thing.
Just like I said about the drive-through. I mean, hell,
Exactly.
it was a better experience than I usually get with the regular people. It really was.
Exactly. And I guess what a lot of people don't realize is, like, that's not just an AI capability thing. That's like, there's a lot of configurations and iterations that need to go in the setup to make sure the right decisions are being made appropriately under the hood. And so most products, don't have that capability to even configure that way. And most law firms don't realize how much work goes into setting that up and iterate on it and getting it to work so all those configurations are right. And so people will get like blown away by how accurate the system is. And it's because that balance between, rules-based and probabilistic-based decision-making.
Good deal, man. So anything, we're kind of close to time to wrap it up. But is there anything that I should ask you that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, this is all good. These are all good topics and good questions. Maybe, I mean, if you want to, you can ask, like, if someone is thinking about implementing AI to do intake, like, what should they consider or think about? I'm happy to.
That's a great question. I'll have to remember that next time. Yeah, go ahead, answer.
Yeah, so a lot of people, as they're exploring how to implement AI for their customer journeys, and I'll focus specifically on intakes. That's the place everybody starts. There's a ton of different options out there. Like, again, it's very easy to stand up a demo, but if you're thinking about actually implementing this, it's just important to kind of look for a few things. Like, one, is there some core capabilities? Like, what are the core capabilities? And then how are those capabilities executed? So how are decisions made along that customer journey? What's the approach? Anybody you're working with, what's the approach the system is taking to making decisions around what questions to ask, why to ask it, what to do? And is there configuration on and granularity on and how those decisions are made so that high complexity can be handled? Most people don't really have a real approach on the balance between deterministic and probabilistic decision making. So evaluate the technology platform and make sure it can handle that. Also, under technology, voice, we found that there isn't an off-the-shelf voice AI layer that can handle the nuances of a back and forth high stakes conversation. Like, think employment law. We have 45-minute conversations with people about, like, sexual assault in the workplace or things like that. And that needs to be handled well. And so there's a lot of configuration that has to go into these voice interactions. And so making sure that's available with whatever, product you're using, and there's that configuration and also auditability on why every decision's been made, and security. You're dealing with a lot of sensitive data. So just make sure that whatever you're implementing, has all of that and is secure and has gone through SOC 2 audits and all that. And also, if you're looking to implement this, don't underestimate how much effort it is to set it up. And if there's not services provided by whoever you're working with to do that, then someone on your team has to do that. And most law firms don't have someone on their team that knows how to do that. And so I'd really evaluate, like the technology and the architecture under the hood, how it actually executes the work, and the approach to the services and the setup and the iteration to make sure it's benchmarking against how you do things currently. And if you do that, then you can get AI to perform probably much more accurately than you ever thought it could. Good
deal. So if somebody wants to find out more or just pick your brain, how can they get up with you, Julien?
Yeah, you can reach me directly, Julien, Julien, at superpanel.io, superpanel.io. You can go to superpanel.io, and there's, contact us forms and places to, fill out, and someone will contact you, but you can reach out to me directly. Also on LinkedIn, I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Julien Emery, and happy to chat, and love talking shop about, how to help law firms grow. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.